She raised a glass to her lover, calling him her real future. She told me to leave my own anniversary party in the house I built for her. She didn't expect our daughter to stand up and expose everything. The scent of cedar is the scent of memory. It's the first thing that hits you when you walk into my workshop, a perfume of sawdust and patience that clings to my clothes and sinks into my skin. For 40 years, I've spoken the language of wood. I know its grain, its secrets, the way it yields to the plane and resists the chisel. My hands, thick at the knuckles and mapped with a lifetime of fine, silvery scars, understand this language better than my own tongue. I was finishing a cradle. Not for me, not anymore. My daughter, Maya, is 24. This was for Miguel, my foreman, whose wife was expecting their first son. I ran my palm over the gentle curve of the headboard, feeling for imperfections. The joinery was seamless, the surface smooth as still water. In my world, things are meant to last. You build a foundation on solid ground. You choose good materials. You join them with integrity. You create something that can withstand time, weather, and the weight of the lives lived within it. It's a simple philosophy, but it has served me well. It built Corrigan and Son Construction from a pickup truck and a box of tools into a business respected throughout the state. And it built my home. Our house sits on a ridge overlooking the valley, a fortress of oak and stone I designed and raised with my own 2 hands 20 years ago. I remember laying the foundation, a declaration of permanence for my wife, Eleanor. I remember hoisting the main beam into place, a spine of Douglas fir that would hold our lives together. The house was my testament, a physical manifestation of my love for her. I thought that was enough. I thought if the walls were strong and the roof didn't leak, the family inside would be safe. Lately, though, a chill had seeped into the house that had nothing to do with the changing seasons. It was in the polite distance Eleanor kept, the way her hand would leave my shoulder just a second too soon. She had begun to look at me, and my workshop scented clothes and calloused hands, as if I were a piece of sturdy, outdated furniture she no longer knew what to do with. The upcoming party, our 25th anniversary, had become her obsession. But it wasn't about us. It was a performance, a production for her new, glossy friends. She walked into the workshop then, her heels clicking on the concrete floor with a sound that was always slightly out of place. She wrinkled her nose, a delicate, practiced gesture. Art, really? Can you not bring the smell of the workshop into the house? Julian's friends are coming over to see your collection. My collection. She called the furniture I bled and sweated over a collection, as if I were a curator, not a creator. And Julian, her art consultant, a man so smooth he seemed to have no sharp edges at all, was a constant presence now. It's a cradle, Elle, I said, my voice quiet. It's for Miguel. She waved a dismissive hand. That's lovely. Just try to air out before dinner. She turned and clicked away, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume to do battle with the honest smell of cedar. I looked down at the cradle, at the strength and care I'd poured into it. I had built her a fortress, and I was beginning to realize I had never once stopped to ask if maybe, just maybe, she felt like a prisoner inside it. The week leading up to the party felt like walking on a floor I hadn't laid myself, uncertain of where the weak spots were. The house was filled with strangers, caterers, florists, assistants, all taking orders from Eleanor and, increasingly, from Julian Croft. He moved through my home with an owner's ease, adjusting a floral arrangement, recommending a different vintage of wine, his voice a low, confident murmur in Eleanor's ear. I felt like a ghost in my own life, a silent witness to the staging of a play I hadn't been given the script for. My older brother, Frank, saw it. He'd been my partner since the beginning, the business-minded pragmatist to my craftsman soul. We were having a beer on his porch 2 nights before the event, the only place I felt I could breathe. You seeing this, Art? He asked, not looking at me, just staring at the setting sun. The way he looks at her, the way she looks at him. I swirled the beer in my bottle. She's just excited about the party, Frank. She's always been insecure about her place in that world. Frank finally turned to me, his gaze sharp enough to cut glass. That's the problem. You always make excuses for her. You see she's unhappy, So what do? You build her a new wing on the house. You buy her a car. You throw money at it. Did you ever once just sit down in that big, fancy house and actually listen to her? His words hit me harder than a sledgehammer. Because he was right. I was a builder, a fixer. When I saw a problem, I solved it with my hands, with materials, with a checkbook. The intricate, messy architecture of a human heart was a blueprint I'd never learned to read. I was so confident in the foundation I'd provided, I never noticed the cracks spreading through the walls of our marriage. It brought back a memory from 5 years earlier, sharp and unsettling. Eleanor had come to me, her eyes bright with an idea she'd gotten from one of her new friends. A family trust. She'd spread a mountain of paperwork across my desk, documents filled with a language of trustees and beneficiaries that felt foreign and slick. It will protect us, Art, she'd said, her hand on my arm. It will protect Maya's future. It's just smarter estate planning. I was in the middle of the biggest project of our company's history, working 16-hour days. I was tired. I trusted her. I saw the earnestness in her face, and I wanted to make her happy, to give her this thing that seemed so important. So I signed where she pointed, my signature, a builder's scrawl, looking clumsy next to the neat, typed legalese. I'd given her control, not just of our assets, but of the very structure of our future. It was a gesture of absolute faith, the kind of man only makes once in his life. I had handed her the hammer, never imagining she would one day use it to tear everything down. The night of the party, our house was transformed. It no longer felt like mine. It was a stage lit with a soft, forgiving glow from dozens of rented-up lights. A string quartet played in the corner of the great room, their music a delicate, expensive tapestry of sound that seemed to mock the solid, unpretentious beams I'd set in the ceiling above them. Eleanor was radiant. She wore a shimmering silver dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark contrast to my simple, dark suit. She moved through the crowd, a queen in her court, bestowing smiles and light touches. Julian was a permanent fixture at her side, his hand resting in the small of her back with a familiarity that made my stomach clench. I tried to mingle. I shook hands with men whose soft palms had never known a callus, whose talk was of stock portfolios and summering in the Hamptons. They would ask what I did, and I'd say, I'm a builder. A polite, blank smile would be the response before their eyes would drift over my shoulder, looking for someone more interesting to talk to. I felt my own substance, the things I could create and repair, turning to vapor in the heat of their casual indifference. I was the sturdy, unglamorous foundation, necessary but invisible, while they all admired the decor. My daughter, Maya, was my anchor in that swirling sea of strangers. She looked beautiful in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, but I could see the tension in her jaw. She had inherited my eye for structure, for seeing how things were put together, and she could see the fault lines in this evening as clearly as I could. He hasn't left her side all night, Dad, she said quietly, handing me a glass of whiskey I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. He's the one who knows all these people. Honey, I said, the excuse sounding weak even to my own ears. That's not what I mean, and you know it, she replied, her gaze sharp. We watched as Julian leaned in and whispered something to Eleanor. She laughed, a high, girlish sound I hadn't heard in years, and tilted her head back, her hand coming up to rest on his chest for a moment. It was an act of casual intimacy, so profound, so public, it was like a slap in the face. It wasn't a secret. It was a declaration. They were the hosts. I was the guest. I saw my brother Frank across the room, leaning against a post I'd set myself, his arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. He caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was a warning. Brace yourself. I took a long swallow of whiskey, the burn in my throat, a welcome distraction from the cold dread coiling in my gut. I looked around the room, at the smiling faces, the clinking glasses, the performance of happiness and success. This was the life Eleanor had always wanted, the one she felt she deserved. And I was beginning to understand that in her vision of that life, There was no longer a place for the man who had built the very room in which she stood. She wasn't just hosting a party. She was unveiling her new reality. The gentle hum of conversation quieted as Eleanor stepped onto the low, makeshift stage the caterers had set up near the fireplace. She tapped a spoon against her champagne flute, a clear, ringing sound that drew all eyes. Julian stood just to her left, a proud impresario watching his star take the spotlight. 25 years, she began, her voice smooth and practiced. A quarter of a century. It's a remarkable milestone. She smiled, a wide, bright smile that didn't reach her eyes, and looked out at the sea of faces. She didn't look at me. Arthur and I, we've built a life. He is a wonderful builder. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. In that moment, it felt like she was describing a contractor, not a husband. He builds things that are solid, things that last, things that are dependable. The word hung in the air, stripped of all its virtue, leaving only the drab husk of predictability. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This wasn't a toast. It was a eulogy. But I've learned something in recent years, she continued, her voice gaining a new, theatrical passion. A life isn't just about the foundation. It's about the art you hang on the walls. It's not just about stability. It's about passion. Her eyes found Julian in the crowd, and a genuine warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in a decade flooded her face. There are people who come into your life and show you what you've been missing. They open your eyes to a world of beauty, of culture, of feeling. The crowd was silent now, sensing the shift from celebration to confrontation. Every guest was frozen, a participant in a public execution. Julian taught me that, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. He taught me about a life of real passion, not just quiet partnership. She raised her glass, not to me, but to him, to new chapters, to real connection. Then, her gaze finally swung to me, cold and hard as granite. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of clinical dismissal. And as part of this new chapter, she announced to the room, her voice rising again, clear and sharp as a shard of glass, this house is being sold to fund a new venture, a gallery we plan to open together. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My house. Sold. She wasn't finished. She looked directly at me, a final, brutal twist of the knife. Art, thank you for everything, for building this beautiful, sturdy box. But I think your work here is done. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a life breaking. It was the sound of my heart stopping. For 25 years, I had been her husband. In 30 seconds, she had demoted me to the hired help, fired me from my own life, and put my home, my sanctuary, my testament, on the auction block. She had taken a wrecking ball to the foundation of my world, and she'd done it with a smile, in front of everyone we knew. I stood there, paralyzed. The blood had drained from my face, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. 200 pairs of eyes were on me, a mix of pity, morbid curiosity, and secondhand embarrassment. My legs felt like they were made of sand. I should leave. I should run. I should do something. But my feet were bolted to the floorboards I had installed myself. Then, a new sound cut through the suffocating silence. It was the soft scrape of a chair, and then another clear, resolute voice filled the room. Excuse me. It was Maya. She stood beside her chair, her back straight as a steel rod. All the color was gone from her face, but her eyes, my eyes, were burning. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at her mother. Maya, sit down. Eleanor hissed, her composure cracking for the first time. This is not your concern. I think it is, Maya said, her voice trembling slightly at first, but gaining strength with every word. This is my home, too. This is my family. She took a step forward, and it felt like the entire room leaned in with her. You stand there and you talk about art and passion and culture, Maya said, her voice ringing with a clarity that belied her age. But I see other things. I see paperwork. I see legal documents. Eleanor's face went from pale to ashen. Julian took a half step forward, a placating smile fixed on his face. Now, Young lady, I think this is just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Croft, Maya shot back, not even glancing at him. Her focus was entirely on her mother. I saw the documents from the family trust. The one Dad signed years ago because he trusted you completely. I saw how you used your power as trustee, power he gave you out of love, to secure a line of credit against this house. A low murmur spread through the room. This was no longer just a marital spat. This was something else. That's just business, Eleanor stammered, her voice losing its regal tone. Is it business, Mom? Maya's voice was now laced with ice. Is it business to forge a signature on a withdrawal authorization? Is it business to funnel that money into a shell corporation registered to Julian Croft? Because that's not what my architecture law class called it. I think the term they used was fraud. The word landed like a grenade. Fraud. The silence was shattered. People were whispering, pulling out their phones. Julian Croft's face, a moment ago so smug, was now a mask of pure panic. Maya's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at me. It was a look of profound apology, of shared pain. Then she turned back to her mother, her voice dropping, filled with a sorrow that was somehow more devastating than her anger. He built this house for you. He built this family for us. And you talk about art? The greatest piece of art in this room is my father's heart. And you just put it up for sale to the lowest bidder. She didn't need to say another word. She walked over to me, took my arm, and her small, firm hand was the only thing holding me upright. She looked at Eleanor, whose face had crumpled into a mask of ugly disbelief. I believe you told my father his work here was done, Maya said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. You're right. Our work here is done. She led me away from the stage, through the stunned crowd that parted for us like the Red Sea. As we walked out the front door, away from the wreckage of my marriage, I didn't feel humiliation anymore. I felt a strange, fierce pride. The house of stone and wood had crumbled, but the foundation I had laid in my daughter was stronger than I had ever known. The workshop, which had always been my sanctuary, now felt like a field hospital. The air, thick with the scent of cedar and oil, was the only thing that felt real. I sat on a low stool, the cradle I'd been working on beside me, its gentle curves a stark contrast to the jagged edges of my reality. I was numb, a building hollowed out by a demolition crew, with only the facade left standing. Frank and Maya were with me. Frank paced back and forth, a caged tiger, his fists clenching and unclenching. Maya sat quietly, her laptop open but untouched, her eyes fixed on my face. I'm going to kill him, Frank growled, stopping to slam his hand on a workbench. Sawdust jumped. I'm going to find that greasy little weasel, and I'm going to tear him apart. It won't help, Frank, I murmured, my voice sounding distant, disconnected. The hell it won't. Art, are you listening? She didn't just cheat on you. She didn't just humiliate you. She forged your name. She tried to steal the roof over your head and the foundation from under the business. The line of credit for the company is tied to the equity in that house. If she sells it, we're sunk. 20 years of work gone. His words finally began to penetrate the fog of my shock. This wasn't just about my broken heart. It was about my legacy. It was about Frank's family and Miguel's and the 24 other men and women who work for us. Their livelihoods were in that house, too. I looked at my hands. These hands had built things, fixed things, provided. Now, they felt useless. It was then that the grief, the deep, gut-wrenching sorrow finally gave way to something else. It was a cold, quiet anger, an anger as solid and unyielding as granite. Eleanor hadn't just betrayed me. She had used my own trust, my own hands as the weapon. The signature I gave her out of love had become the tool for my ruin. She had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She had mistaken my trust for foolishness. I looked up from my hands and met Frank's eyes, then Maya's. The numbness was gone. She thinks I'm just a builder, I said, my voice low and even. She's about to find out what I'm capable of when someone tries to tear down my work. Maya closed her laptop. A new light was in her eyes, a focused, predatory gleam that mirrored my own. What's the plan, Dad? I stood up and walked over to my drafting table, The one where I'd drawn the first sketches of the house all those years ago. I picked up a pencil, its sharp point feeling solid and real in my fingers. "First," I said, looking at my daughter and my brother, the only part of my foundation that remained unshaken. "We stopped the sale. Then, we get a new set of blueprints." Frank stopped pacing and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "What kind of blueprints?" "The kind you use for a demolition. The first rule of building is to know your terrain. Before you lay a single stone, you survey the land, you test the soil, you understand the forces you're working with." Frank, ever the pragmatist, put in simpler terms. "We're not going into this blind, Art. We're not going to let emotion run this. We do this smart." He insisted we hire a private investigator, a former cop named Sullivan who had a reputation for being discreet and thorough. I was hesitant. It felt like another stranger trampling through the ruins of my life. But Frank was adamant. "We need to know everything about this Julian Croft," he'd said. "Not just what he pretends to be." It was the smartest money we ever spent. 3 days later, Sullivan called us into his drab little office. He slid a thin file across his metal desk. "Julian Croft is a ghost," Sullivan said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "Or he tries to be, but he made a mistake. He got married 7 years ago. He's currently separated from his wife, a woman named Lydia Croft." My heart sank. Another victim. Another woman he'd left in his wake. "There's more," Sullivan continued. "She's not just any woman. She's a forensic accountant. And according to my sources, she's been building her own case against her husband for the better part of a year." A forensic accountant. The words hung in the air, filled with a beautiful, terrible promise. I got Lydia Croft's number. Making that call was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I was asking a stranger to open up her own wounds to help me with mine. I met her at a quiet, anonymous coffee shop halfway between our two towns. She was not what I expected. Lydia was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of weary competence. There were no tears, no drama. She looked at me, sized me up, and got straight to the point. "You're Arthur Corrigan," she said. It wasn't a question. "I read about your wife's performance." I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what you've been through," I replied. She gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Don't be. I stopped being sorry a long time ago. Now I'm just focused on getting justice." She opened her briefcase and pulled out a slim, black USB drive. She slid it across the table. "My husband, Mr. Croft, doesn't just advise women on art," she said, her voice dropping to a low, confidential tone. "He advises them to move their assets into high-yield, private investment vehicles that he controls. He pays early investors with money from new investors. A classic Ponzi scheme. Small scale but vicious. He targets women who are emotionally vulnerable and financially comfortable. Women like my mother before she passed. Women like your wife." I stared at the USB drive. It felt as heavy as a block of granite. "He's a parasite, Mr. Corrigan," she said, her eyes meeting mine. They were filled not with hate, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. "And I have the receipts. Bank transfers, shell corporation documents, emails. Everything the SEC and the FBI will need. Your Eleanor isn't his partner in crime. She's his next mark. He was going to use the money from your house to pay off other angry investors, then disappear, leaving her with nothing but debt and legal trouble." I finally understood. Eleanor thought she was trading up from a simple builder to a man of culture. In reality, she had traded a craftsman for a con man. She had fled a fortress only to walk straight into a trap. With Lydia's USB drive in our possession, the game changed. It was no longer a messy divorce. It was a strategic takedown. Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Dave Chun, looked at the contents of the drive with a kind of professional awe. "This is a nuke, Art," he'd said, looking up from his computer. "This isn't just about stopping the sale of your house. This is about putting Julian Croft in a federal prison." The plan was enacted with the quiet precision of a well-run construction site. First, Chin filed an emergency injunction to freeze the family trust and block any sale or transfer of assets, citing evidence of fraudulent inducement and forgery. The legal language was a dense wall of text, but the message was simple. The bank account was closed. The first blow landed silently. A wire transfer that never arrived, a call to a realtor that went unreturned. Second, Lydia Croft, through her own attorney, formally submitted her package of evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the local FBI field office. She wasn't just a scorned wife. She was a whistleblower, a citizen reporting a federal crime. The wheels of a bureaucracy much larger and more powerful than Julian Croft could imagine began to grind, slowly but unstoppably. Third, and this was my contribution, was the silence. Eleanor called. The first time, her voice was annoyed, demanding, "Art, what is going on? The bank is saying there's a hold on the trust. You need to call them and fix this." I listened, said nothing, and hung up. The second time, a day later, her voice was tinged with panic. "Julian isn't answering his phone. The realtor said there's a legal challenge. Did you do this? This is our future, Art. You can't just—" I hung up. The third time, she was crying. A raw, desperate sound that was half rage, half fear. "Please, Art. I don't understand what's happening. Just talk to me." That was the hardest one. A part of me, the husband I had been for 25 years, wanted to answer, to soothe, to fix. But the man I was becoming knew that my silence was a more powerful tool than any word I could say. It was a mirror, forcing her to look at the reality she had created without my reflection in it to blame. Every unanswered call was a brick being laid in the wall between her and the life she had tried to steal. Meanwhile, Maya was running reconnaissance online. She tracked the fallout in their social circle. A charity gala Julian and Eleanor were supposed to co-chair suddenly had them listed as no longer involved. A fawning article about Julian in a local luxury magazine was quietly pulled from a website. Reputations, I was learning, were like houses of cards. All it took was one firm tug on the tablecloth for the whole thing to come crashing down. We were not acting out of rage. It felt colder, more methodical than that. It was like deconstructing a badly built structure, piece by piece, before it collapsed on its own and hurt more people. We were exposing the rot in the beams, the cracks in the foundation. Julian Croft had built his life on lies, and we were simply introducing him, and Eleanor, to the unforgiving gravity of the truth. She came to the workshop a week later. The rain was sheeting down outside, a miserable gray curtain that matched the state of our lives. I heard her car pull up, the crunch of tires on the gravel. I didn't stop what I was doing, running a piece of maple through the planer, its high-pitched whine filling the space. The door creaked open and she stood there, dripping, stripped of all her glamour. Her expensive dress was wrinkled, her hair was a mess, and her face was pale and puffy from crying. She looked lost. I shut off the planer. The sudden silence was immense. "Art," she began, her voice a raw whisper. "He's gone. Julian. He took money from my personal accounts. He's just gone." I didn't say anything. I just picked up a block plane and began to shave a fine, paper-thin curl of wood from the edge of the board. The simple, repetitive motion kept me grounded. "It was him," she sobbed, taking a step closer. "He manipulated me. He filled my head with all those ideas about art, about living a bigger life. He made me feel seen. I saw you, Eleanor," I said, my voice quiet even. I didn't look at her. I just watched the curl of wood fall to the floor. "I saw you every day for 25 years. I saw you when you were happy and sad and scared. I saw you when you were sick, and I saw you when you felt strong. You weren't unseen. You just didn't like what you saw." She flinched as if I'd struck her. "That's not fair." "Fair." I finally put the plane down and turned to face her. The anger was gone, replaced by a vast, weary sadness. Was it fair to stand up in front of our friends, our daughter, and announce you were leaving me for another man? Was it fair to try and sell the home I built for us from under my feet? Was it fair to use the trust one gave you as a weapon against me? "I made a mistake," she cried. "A terrible, terrible mistake. Please, Art, we can fix this." I almost laughed. Fix this. The builder's creed. But some things can't be fixed. Some foundations are too compromised. "The problem wasn't that I was boring, Eleanor," I said, my voice as calm and steady as I'd ever heard it. "The problem was that I was solid, and you mistook solid for simple. You were looking for cracks, and when you couldn't find any, you decided to make them yourself. I picked up my tools, my hand steady. I can forgive a mistake, a moment of weakness. I cannot forgive a design. And this was your design. She stood there, speechless, as the truth of those words washed over her. She finally understood. I wasn't going to fix this for her. I wasn't going to fix her. She had designed her new life, and now she would have to live in it. Alone. The months that followed were a quiet unwinding. The news broke that Julian Croft had been arrested by the FBI at an airport in Miami, trying to board a flight to a country with no extradition treaty. His picture was in the paper, the smug confidence gone, replaced by the slack-jawed surprise of a man whose tricks had finally run out. Eleanor, entangled in the legal mess of the trust and named in several civil suits from Croft's other victims, faded from the society pages and from our lives. She was a ghost, haunting a life that no longer existed. Our lawyers handled the divorce. It was clean, quiet, and final. I won the house back, of course, but it was no longer my home. It was a monument to a past I needed to leave behind. The day the sale closed to a new family, I stood with Maya on the ridge, looking at it one last time. The stone was still strong, the oak beams were still solid, but it was just a building now. The soul had left it. I felt no sadness, only a quiet sense of release. "Are you okay, Dad?" Maya asked, slipping her arm through mine. "I am," I said, and the words were true. I really am. A few weeks later, I unrolled a new set of blueprints on the old drafting table in my workshop. It was a different kind of house. Smaller, simpler. It had clean lines, wide windows to let in the light, and a porch that wrapped all the way around. It was a house designed for living in, not for performing in. Maya came in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She looked over my shoulder at the drawings. "It's beautiful, Dad," she said softly. "It's smaller," I replied. "No," she said, her eyes shining. "It's smarter. More light. Less stone." She was right. I looked down at the blueprints, at the clean white lines on the deep blue paper. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back at the ruins of what I had lost. I was looking forward to what we could build next. I had spent a lifetime learning the language of wood and stone. I had learned, through fire and heartbreak, that the strongest foundations aren't made of concrete. They're made of truth, of trust, of the quiet, unwavering love of a daughter who shows you how to build again. And this time, I knew we would build something that could truly last.